You're homeless.
Yes, right now, with 8 children.
Latoya Goodwin goes to the Homeless Resource Center for help, while her landlord of less than a month goes to the courthouse to evict her and sue her for more than $1,300. Have you filed an eviction on her?
No, not yet.
Okay, but you plan to?
Yeah, well, yeah.
Even though she was only here a week?
Well, if she doesn't do her part, the contract is two sides.
Code enforcement did tell her you have to leave. It's dangerous to stay here.
That's between them and code enforcement. What's between her and I is our contract, okay? That she's supposed to pay rent, and she doesn't.
Terrence Winder is the manager of code enforcement. Here's how that department is supposed to operate. Tenant calls them. They find violations. They send a certified letter to the landlord. The landlord has 30 days to make repairs or demolish. After 30 days, code enforcement re-inspects. If the landlord fails to make repairs, then the inspector asks the marshal to serve the landlord with a citation. The landlord then goes before a judge. But after pouring through hundreds of documents, News 12 found code enforcement is not always following that process, and it's putting families in danger. That's why you guys didn't go back in there 30 days later?
So once a property is vacant, there's no unsafe issue, anything that's imminent, because the tenant is not in that property.
But that would be a way of not getting it done, right?
What's that?
To evict the person.
For him?
Yeah.
It prolongs the situation. Yes, it does.
It certainly prolonged code enforcement re-inspecting Pamplona again, rented 3 times to 3 different tenants with code violations gone unchecked. So now we're at our 3rd tenant. She complains. You go in there, find all kind of issues. And some of these are pretty bad, like it's getting worse and worse as time goes on. He evicts her. It happened here too. In 2014, code enforcement wrote it's unsafe and does not need to be occupied. They did not return to re-inspect. We found at least 3 tenants lived in the unsafe home over the next 4 years. A similar story here. Last year, inspectors found electrical problems. Lynn evicted the tenant who called them. Inspectors did not come back until a new tenant called 8 months later. They find the same electrical problems in the home for a second time. Had they gone back, the report shows the re-inspection is still pending. 14, 15, 16, and the case is still open. There's still not been a follow-up.
I think what we're dealing with here is that before a follow-up is made, that the tenant is always evicted.
We went door to door at homes owned by other landlords.
It's just not right. It's not right.
And found code enforcement is not always re-inspecting, even when someone does live in the home. This family made their first call to code enforcement 3 years ago.
My mom should never have to walk 3 blocks to get water. She shouldn't have to use a porta potty that he puts out in the front yard for her.
The inspector found a broken sewer line and no running water in the home. He sent a violation letter to the landlord to fix within 3 days. The inspector did not return until the family called to complain again. 2 years later, he sent a second violation letter to the landlord, but yet again, the inspector didn't follow up. A year later, the family called a 3rd time about other problems in the home. This time, the inspector told them they need to vacate.
It's really awful.
The re-inspection is still pending. So you've lived here 2 years now? Just like it's still pending on this Ellis Street home.
And I've been, trying to get them fix things, and they always fix the other houses up in front of mine,
Bobby Laws does his best to navigate through the broken slabs on the floor with his walker. A year ago, code enforcement sent a letter to the landlord. They told him he couldn't rent the home until all of this was fixed. If the inspector came back,
that's what makes me sick right here.
he would have found Mr. Laws living here.
And we do re-inspections on these properties. That's what I'm saying.
But some of these go on for years, like before it's re-inspected.
I have to disagree on that.
Don't you think this is extremely dangerous? Because another tenant just gets put in there and it's the same, we're talking serious issues.
Yeah, it depends on what the issues are. If it talks about electrical is an unsafe issue. If the building is falling in, which these are not.
Oh, but we are talking about unsafe issues like electrical. Remember the home on Pamplona? Inspectors found a problem with the panel box in 2016. It seems that problem somehow disappeared without doing a reinspection. Code enforcement found the home in compliance last year. A family now lives there.
The electrical was fixed.
How do you know it was fixed? Because you said you never went out there and saw it.
Yeah, we never went out and did another inspection on it, but the electrical was fixed.
Did you see receipts?
The receipts of service.
Yeah,
no,
for
we
electrical.
we didn't have any.
How do you know it was fixed? You're just taking his word?
No, we're not taking his word. What this was something going on with the breaker system.
But back to landlord Ming Lin, who believes most of his violations are unfair. So you believe code enforcement is targeting you?
Oh, yes. No question about it.
But records show code enforcement rarely punishes him. Remember the violation process? If the landlord fails to make repairs, then the inspector asks the marshal to serve the landlord with a citation. The landlord then goes before a judge. 3 times last year, inspectors asked the marshals to serve Ming Lin with a citation, but they never did. The director of code enforcement spoke to me this morning and asked me to hold off on these citations at this time. Director of code enforcement told me to hold off on these citations at this time. Same thing here. Why would you do that when you know these? I mean, these are some of these properties that have some major issues.
Well, I don't know if that was me.
We took our findings to the marshal.
When you see those cases like that, it's just somebody's taking advantage of the system.
More accurately, the lack of a system.
Code enforcement and the marshal's office operate off 2 different databases. So all we have is just eviction paperwork. We got an eviction to go out and serve for this address. We have no idea of what code enforcement violations until they call us and let us know that they want us to issue the citation for it.
3 systems in place to protect families from unsafe properties, and none with a complete picture of what is happening over and over and over again. Do you agree some people's lives have been in danger?
To that point, no.
In a South Augusta neighborhood sits a home for rent. It's not fancy, but all LaToya Goodwin needs is a safe place to call home.
The gas is seeping out in here. With me and my kids sleeping, my kids could have been dead.
There's a gas leak along with other dangers in the home. 9 days after signing a lease on the Parkwood Drive home, code enforcement tells her she has to leave.
That took 3-4 months.
3 or 4 months to save up for your first month's rent and a deposit.
And a deposit.
And now this place is going to be condemned.
Yes.
A few weeks earlier, code enforcement took these pictures of a home on Wrightsboro Road. A woman told them she put a deposit down, but found the home like this. When she came to move in, inspectors found life safety violations. Ming Lin is the owner of both condemned homes. Did you give her her deposit and first month's rent back?
No, of course not. I didn't do anything wrong.
You've had a lot of violations with code enforcement over the years. Why is that?
First of all, I got a lot of properties.
More than 40 in Richmond County. 9 are currently in violation of the minimum housing and property maintenance codes. Some of these, I've gone through a lot of your properties over the years. There's some really serious violations in there.
Okay. I was able to answer every one of your questions. I'm not afraid of you tell me specifically something, and I'll address it specifically.
Let's say like the Pamplona for one. We first reported on the Pamplona Drive 2 years ago.
I was scared. I told him, I said, because in my son's room, the ceiling fan light had caught fire. We had to go up in the attic and put the fire out with a fire extinguisher.
Robin Norris called us after she found a letter from code enforcement. The letter was dated less than 2 months before she moved in. It listed a string of violations, including dangerous problems with the hot water heater and a warning that a person should not occupy the home. She called code enforcement. What Norris didn't know was she was the 3rd tenant from Pamplona to report the house to code enforcement. Mr. Lin promised he would make all these repairs before I moved in. And then I called code enforcement. He said he would evict me if I called code enforcement, and then you do.
Well, okay, let's put it this way. I told him, if you're going to play dirty with us, There will be no understanding from us.
And Lynn did evict Norris. He told the court she abused the property, the same property code enforcement condemned long before Norris moved in. Still, the court orders Robin Norris to pay landlord Lynn $850.
There's been a couple cases where I've seen code enforcement come in and condemn a property. They give the date that tenant has to be out, and you still file eviction paperwork. And
No, that's my right. That's my right.
And that's because Georgia is one of 8 states without a law protecting tenants from landlords who retaliate. We went through more than 100 evictions filed by landlord Ming Lin. We compared eviction dates in the magistrate's computer system with the dates of violations in code enforcement's computer system. We found more than a dozen cases where landlord Lin evicts his renters days after they report him to code enforcement.
If everything about me is wrong, why is the court cases I'm winning? Why is it I'm able to garnish them? Why is it they not all of them come sue me?
He's won more than $250,000 in court from evicting his tenants over the last 7 years. Many of his tenants will tell you it's a struggle to make ends meet.
Now, what size house? Is that 4-bedroom?
There's no money left to pay an attorney to sue the landlord who has just evicted them. So we went digging into evictions and found a pattern that allows family after family to move into homes that code enforcement deems dangerous. And code enforcement, we found, just isn't enforcing the codes.